Well, welcome back. My first guest today is our very own Luke Jones. Always a pleasure having you on, Luke.
Dennis, how are you, my friend?
I am fantastic. I know you had a great trip, you and Nestor, up there to Pittsburgh. You brought us back a hard-fought, well-deserved victory.
Yeah, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, regardless of circumstances, backup quarterback, number three quarterback, Mitch Trubisky throwing interceptions inside the 20-yard line, which certainly helped out what was overall a very stout defensive effort. But a win against the Steelers is always good for the soul, right? For the
Mm,
Ravens and certainly for the fans. And we kind of look at how the last few weeks have played out, even in victory, not feeling so great about the Carolina win coming out of the bye. Certainly not feeling great about what happened in Jacksonville. Feeling pretty terrible about what happened with against Denver with Lamar Jackson going down and knowing he's missing some time. So getting that win, I don't want to say it'd be too dramatic to say it was season defining or season saving or anything like that. But I think it was a really, it was a win that was good for the soul. And I
yeah.
think it had everyone feeling better. And not to say that this football team doesn't still have very real questions, but when you kind of consider where they are right now from a health standpoint, other than Lamar Jackson, they are getting healthier. We saw J.K. Dobbins back. We saw Ronnie Stanley back. We saw Marcus Williams back, and all of them make a big impact against the Steelers. So, from that standpoint, and knowing how we were talking a week ago at this time, talking about these back-to-back AFC North road games, saying just get one of them at the very least. Well, they did that, and now they'll have an opportunity on Saturday to try to get that second one and keep themselves in good position in what has really become a dogfight with the Cincinnati Bengals for the top of the AFC North.
Yeah, no question about it. It was a very, very big game, a huge game. The game meant a lot more to the Steelers and to the Ravens, which I thought added more credibility to the Ravens win. They were able to go up there against a desperate Steelers team without guard, Kevin Zeitler. The Steelers knew that the Ravens were going to run the ball. And the Ravens ran the ball, Luke, without Lamar Jackson, which, he opens up lanes as teams have to have a spy on him. The edge rushers have to stay at home in case he keeps the ball. So without the explosiveness that Lamar Jackson presents, to still run the ball for 200 yards plus was just a very, 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 very big thing, Luke.
Yeah, it was encouraging. There's no question. And let's be clear. I mean, we know Tyler Huntley, and I think it was more impressive probably in the fourth quarter, more than anything. I mean, it was
100%.
impressive throughout, but the fourth quarter, especially where you have a rookie free agent playing quarterback, a guy taking his first snaps of his NFL career, a guy that, let's face it, 90+% of Ravens fans didn't even know who he was before Sunday.
I had
I mean,
friends.
let's be clear.
To your point, I had friends of mine saying, "Who's Anthony Brown?" I'm like, "Come on, guys.
Exactly.
You're not a real fan if you don't know who Anthony Brown is. Come on.
Exactly.
They knew who Brett Hundley was, but not Anthony Brown. Like, come on,
It
he's a
just
backup."
it just tells me that you didn't pay attention during fake football season, right? During the preseason, where we saw Anthony Brown play well, and that's the reason why he was on the practice
He
squad.
did.
But I think, because we know Tyler Huntley can run. I mean, is it the same as Lamar? No, but he can run. I mean, he really can. It's not as though they had a Joe Flacco backup,
Right.
that's immobile. But for me, that fourth quarter, where very clearly, as much poise as Anthony Brown showed in maturity, they clearly weren't asking him to do a whole lot throwing the football. That's
Yeah.
obvious. Uh, so for them to be able to do what they did in that fourth quarter, for me, it was really two things really stand out. One, as the Steelers are playing Renegade after Calais Campbell's field goal block, that's supposed to be that galvanizing song for the Pittsburgh defense, for that crowd. The crowd was fired up at that point in time. And the Ravens run the ball down the field, take 8 minutes off the clock, get that field goal to go up 2 scores. And then, of course, the play that sealed it after Pittsburgh had driven down the field and scored the touchdown to make it a one-score game again, the third down conversion run by Gus Edwards, where Pittsburgh knew the Ravens were running the ball.
Yeah.
There was nothing about that was fancy. They were going to run the football. Now, certainly the blocking and the scheme and all of that deserves plenty of praise, but it's pretty difficult to run the football when your opponent knows you want to run the football. And for the Ravens to do that on the road, and we know, look, Pittsburgh's not very good, but they had been better in recent weeks. Everything that involved there, that was a really good win. Again, I don't want to make too much of it. Some of the same questions we've been talking about for weeks, we can talk about right now. I don't think we necessarily solved anything in that way, But if you do look at the Ravens and how they profile, how they're going to profile once again, presumably with Tyler Huntley, as it looks like he's going to get through concussion protocol. He's practicing, so good sign there as far as his availability for Saturday afternoon. But it's going to be another game where they're going to be running the football. Let's face it. There's not a whole lot to hang your hat on with the passing game right now. And Greg Roman even talked about it this week that Mark Andrews is seeing more double teams than ever. Why? Well, we know they don't have much else. You know, the wide receiver position is lacking, to put it nicely. So they're going to have to lean a whole lot on their running game once again. So with that in mind, go to Cleveland and try to start fast and put yourself in a position where you can get an early lead and really lean on that running game. And it'll be interesting because I think the Browns are going to be trying to do the same thing. So it'll be a battle of wills there. And you don't want to take anything for granted. It's going to be a big one for Cleveland. First home game for Deshaun Watson. He hasn't looked great so far, but he did look better in game 2 than he did in game 1 against Houston. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But for the Ravens, it's just a matter of, hey, go there and get it done any way you possibly can. And it's not going to be easy. Nothing is at this point. They're not blowing anyone out at this point in time. I mean, I think that's evident since the bye week. So we'll see how it plays out. But again, getting that win in Pittsburgh takes some of that pressure off for Saturday's game in Cleveland.
To your many fantastic points, Luke, there was a point late in the game where the announcers pointed out that Mark Andrews was split out wide and T.J. Watt was on him. And I believe Anthony Brown was the quarterback. Now, if Lamar Jackson was the quarterback, that they had a good chance of converting a touchdown in that situation. But when you have a rookie quarterback there, an undrafted free agent, his job is to hand the ball, not turn it over. I had some friends behind the Ravens sideline, and they said Ronnie Stanley was just extremely animated the entire game, very vocal, very vociferous, dropping F-bombs, getting that offensive line fired up. He is such a difference maker when he's out there, Luke. When he's there, I feel a lot better about the offense than when he's not.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I would hope so. I mean, the Ravens invested a near $100 million contract in him a couple years ago for that very reason. I think we even saw some of that. You mentioned some of the vocal, animated side of him, which, if you watch a Ronnie Stanley interview, you wouldn't think that because you can tell. Look, he's gracious with his time, but to suggest that I think he's overly enthused about doing media, I don't think he is. Which that's fine. I'm not expecting every player to feel that way, but. I think we saw this. What was it? The New Orleans game, was it? Where he and Lamar were actually going at it as far as, getting out of the huddle and the delay of game, and Lamar, spiking the ball or whatever he did at the time. And Stanley kind of said, hey, knock it off.
Knock it off.
It was fine. They squashed it right away. It wasn't a big thing, but does speak to Ronnie Stanley, the football player, as opposed to Ronnie Stanley off the football field. Kind of a different personality. It appears anyway. So, and that's great. You need some of that. And more than anything, as you mentioned, I mean, his play has been terrific. You still hold your breath every time he goes down or anytime he is getting up slowly, or just understanding the long-term health of the ankle, as he missed 2 more games after what happened a few weeks ago. But it certainly makes a major difference. Lamar is still the centripetal force, right? He's still the catalyst for everything. But I think you'd be hard pressed. Mark Andrews, I think right now, just because of the current state of their pass catchers. But Ronnie Stanley's right there. However you want to rank those 3 guys, I think they're the most important. And take nothing away from J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards and how important they are, or Kevin Zeitler, for example. But yeah, they're a different offensive line. They're a different offense. It appears when they have Ronnie Stanley out there. And again, his return to the field was certainly welcomed in what they were able to do on the ground on this past Sunday.
All right, look, let's talk about the much maligned Greg Roman for a minute. Even when the Ravens win, he gets beat up. He didn't get beat up in this game, and I guess it's difficult for people to pile on him when he rushed for 200 yards against a decent Steelers defense. With Craig Hayward, his name was not mentioned much. T.J. Watt had 1 sack. But they rushed for 200 yards plus without Lamar Jackson in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see. I mean, to your point, I have a tough time really finding, even if they didn't win, and let's face it, as well as they ran the football, they scored 16 points. I mean, it's not as though it was an offensive explosion, but you do what you have to do when you're playing with a backup, and then you're down to a third string who was an undrafted rookie who was elevated to the practice squad. This wasn't a fourth round pick who's their number 3 quarterback of the future or something like that, as you see with certain teams and rosters at this point in time. So, I mean, it really was a case of, they knew, Pittsburgh knew what the Ravens were going to try to do. There was going to be very little done in the passing game, especially when Huntley went out midway through the third quarter. So, from that standpoint, to be able to run, let's face it, as it pertains to the running game, and I know we've talked about the run struggling of late, it's very evident Greg Roman is a great offensive coordinator when it comes to the running game. So we shouldn't be shocked by that, as much as he still does deserve credit for that. The big question that anyone has, and I still have, and nothing about what happened Sunday in Pittsburgh changes my feelings on it, continues to be the passing game and the long-term vision of where this offense is going, which we're not going to find any answers on Saturday because Lamar Jackson's not going to play. So, so from that standpoint, you just deal with the short term, the present, because that's all you really can do. It's always week to week, but it especially is when you're talking about missing your star franchise quarterback. So, from that standpoint, you love what Greg Roman does with the run game. The passing game, it is what it is right now. It's a mess. I don't think there's a nice way to describe it. There really wasn't, even before Lamar gets hurt. So so from that standpoint, you have to lean into what you do absolutely, the best, and that's running the football. And you have to hope that Cleveland, who has not been a good run defense overall this year, although I would say when the Ravens played them back in week 7, the Ravens did pile up yardage. But remember, it was a grind. I mean, it wasn't a ton of chunk plays running the football. So can Cleveland match that kind of performance as they did in Baltimore in week 7? I think time will tell. And if they can, then this will certainly be a major dogfight, no pun intended, in terms of what probably isn't going to be a ton of points scored. I know the weather, some of the forecasts say it could be some touchy weather, as you would expect in Cleveland in mid-December. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I don't think it's a big secret what the Ravens are going to try to do on Saturday. They're going to try to pound the rock. I think that's what Cleveland wants to get into. But for the Browns, the key is going to be, can they jump out to a lead and make some plays with a passing game that, hey, they've got their franchise quarterback out there now. They have Amari Cooper. They have David Njoku. They should be able to make some plays through the air, and that's what's going to be the big question for the Ravens. Great as the run defense has been, and it's been elite. It's been as good as it's ever been for the Ravens here. Really going back to since that week 7 game against Cleveland, where the Browns ran pretty well against them. The Ravens haven't given up anything on the ground, but I think this is where it is fair to point out, Mitch Trubisky and the Steelers move the ball through the air. Now, you love the takeaways. If you can guarantee you're going to get those, then fine. But that's where you do look at this and say, okay, this Cleveland passing game could be more of a test if Deshaun Watson, who played better later in his second game, albeit a loss against the Bengals, if he can carry that over, then the Ravens will have a little more of a challenge on their hands, certainly. But at the same time, you're still talking about a quarterback who hadn't played in 2 years, and I think his first 2 games, pretty evident the kind of rust that he's shown. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out in that way. I think if Browns fans are certainly expecting to see more and want to see more in his home debut, I think that much is stating the obvious.
All right, look, as we segue from the Steelers' victory to the Browns matchup, let's talk about J.K. Dobbins for a minute. Clearly, he's got to get his win back. Clearly, he's got to get in better shape. He was never a burner, though, right? At Ohio State, he didn't have that extra gear, which I think is part of the reason why he dropped to the late second round and was available, surprisingly, for the Ravens. So I'm not sure, even if he was 100%, he could have scored in that situation. But he's been able to rip off 20, 30, 40, 50-yard gains throughout his career. I was more impressed, Luke, by the touchdown run. He got hit, and he showed a second burst and got into the end zone. I think that is huge for the Ravens in those short yardage situations going forward.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, clearly Gus Edwards is the guy that you really lean on for those short yardage situations. And I don't think that's going to change. I think, that was a situation of game flow, and Dobbins, had the 44-yard run. And I'll be honest, Dennis, I don't even know how much of it's his wind as much as I think he still just has hitch in his giddy up from the injury. And to be clear, I don't say that suggesting that he shouldn't be playing or that he can't be effective or that he's even running the risk of re-injury. Believe me, that there's a whole medical team that's very much invested in having an effective J.K. Dobbins, and he has people advising him that are invested in his career first and foremost, but beyond or before what the Ravens want to do as far as success on the field. So I think it's just he's not 100% recovered from the injury, and in the sense that, as we talked about with Saquon Barkley a lot, using that as an example earlier this year, it generally takes a player, especially when you're talking about multiple ligament injuries like the one Dobbins sustained against Washington in the preseason 2 years ago, or last year, I should say, that it's going to take some time. And we can all remember Jamal Lewis in 2002. He was a 1,000-yard rusher. He had a good season. He wasn't the 2003 Jamal Lewis, but not even close to it. And it's not to suggest that J.K. Dobbins is going to run for 2,000 yards next year, but it does speak to, a lot of times it's being another year removed, another off season where you can just work out and you're not rehabbing anymore. That's where I think, that'll pay dividends for him. But in the meantime, with the healthy offensive line, and assuming you get Kevin Zeitler back on Saturday and you keep this offensive line intact for the remainder of the season, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards both give you more upside than Kenyon Drake and Justice Hill and the since released Mike Davis. So it's very encouraging on that front. And again, for Dobbins, I think it's reasonable to think, because he's had a lighter workload this year, because he had the scope, that he could get better and better. Doesn't mean he's going to run for 150 plus yards every week. And certainly teams are going to be keying on the Ravens run game, and we'll see what that looks like. Maybe not so much the rest of this month, but getting into January and what looks like is going to be a postseason team. But he, in the meantime, even him at less than pre-injury form, let's say, he's still able to be effective. And that's what's really encouraging. And to your point, it wasn't just, looking at him, from a breakaway speed standpoint, or getting caught, or, showing a little bit of a limp when he tries to cut with that left knee, which I think is still a little bit of an issue. I think as much as he has confidence, I think there's still muscle memory, and there's still, that the subconscious that I think is tough to battle, which I can't even relate, because I've never had an injury like that, or anyone who's been in that kind of an athletic environment. It's hard for anyone else to relate. But I think even with him being a slightly, and I want to stress this, because if it was more than slightly, he wouldn't be able to do what he did on Sunday. But slightly diminished version of him compared to before the injury, he can still be successful, especially if you block it up right and you put him in the best position. And I think you still need to manage his workload. I thought it was interesting to note that that was actually matched a career high for him for runs against the Steelers, which was kind of amazing. But it speaks to a Greg Roman running game, speaks to where they were a couple years ago when Mark Ingram was still in the mix as far as that running game with Edwards and Dobbins. So I don't think this suddenly means that Dobbins is going to get 20 plus carries a game moving forward. I think that workload's probably going to be about where you see, and you'll see Gus Edwards be comparable, and it'll be maybe 45, those guys, and maybe 10% Justice Hill, or, once Lamar Jackson's back, obviously you throw him into the mix as far as carrying the football. But certainly encouraging to see what we saw from J.K. Dobbins, especially being his first action since week 6, when we saw him not look right against the Giants, playing on that turf, and understanding at that point he made that decision to have his knee scoped.
All right, look, let's talk about the defense, right? Looks like the swagger of the Ravens defense is coming back. They pick the ball off, and then they celebrate in the end zone. They're mocking the Steelers fan base by waving imaginary towels over their head. The Steelers play Renegade, and we see Calais Campbell and a bunch of other guys waving the towels and, again, mocking the crowd. The Roquan Smith factor has been huge, right? And as this thing goes on, they're not in this position without him, not diminishing the contributions of the other players, especially the block field goal by Calais Campbell, which can't be understated. But Roquan Smith's addition, Najee Harris and company, Steelers running backs, I believe, were held like 48 yards. You factor in Pickett and Trubisky scrambles, under 70 yards. This team now with Roquan in the middle is built to stop guys like Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, and now this week Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I was just talking a few minutes ago about the pass defense still being a little bit of a question for me. Not that it's terrible, but I'm not ready to say that it's a great pass defense or even a really good one. I think it has the ability to make those game-changing plays, which certainly you're going to need that come January. But there's no question about the run defense. I mean, the run defense has been absolutely stifling. It's been suffocating, really going back since, like I said, a couple of weeks even before the Roquan Smith acquisition, but certainly since then. And look, I get it. I mean, it's not as though they've been playing teams that are great running the football every single week, but certainly teams that want to run the football have not been able to do it against them. And that's where I think Saturday will be such an interesting test, even though Cleveland's run game has kind of gone in the wrong direction the last couple of weeks. So that's probably not a great sign for the Browns.
Yeah.
And anyone that's trying to size up this game, I think it's important to note that. But when you look at this Ravens run defense, I mean, not that it was terrible early in the season, but it certainly was more vulnerable. And we certainly saw them. Some teams have the ability to make the run part of what they, part of what they wanted to do. Make that part a relevant point of the game. And from really since that last Cleveland game, this Ravens run defense. I mean, you look at it; it's been. You see the numbers. I'm reading it off right now. Since giving up 4.7 yards per carry against Cleveland, 2.9 against the Buccaneers, 3.2 against New Orleans, 2.1 against Carolina, a team that really wanted to run the football, 1.9 against Jacksonville, 3.1 against Denver, 3.3 against Pittsburgh. I mean, what more needs to be said? I mean, that's those types of numbers right there over the last 6 weeks. That right there is 2000 Ravens like in terms of run defense, not the overall defense, but the run defense. So, I mean, it's very clearly a strength for this team. Again, that how that's going to translate and what that looks like, as we talk about potential January matchups, that's a different question. But for teams that want to run the football, like Pittsburgh this past week, certainly like Cleveland on Saturday, it certainly bodes well. And I mean, Roquan Smith has been right in the middle of it, and it's clear that he's. I don't want to say he's become the guy from a leadership standpoint, because there's still some other leaders on this team, and I think I don't want to overstate the what he's meant as a leader, but I do think he has a very addicting personality in terms of guys gravitating to him. I think we've seen that. I know Dan Pompei wrote a really good piece on him, and someone who knew him from his Chicago days. So I think it's been really good to see. I think it's becoming apparent that the Ravens are going to do everything they can to try to re-sign him. I think he's going to be open to re-signing. I still am not going to shy away from whatever that number is and ramifications that has on the rest of the roster. And again, we've talked about this in passing before, but do you re-sign? Do you sign Roquan Smith to a lucrative deal and then look to trade Patrick Queen in the offseason in the way that the Ravens did with Marquise Brown and turn that into a first-round pick? Do you there are lots of different ways you can go about this. The one thing I will say is I don't think you can keep Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen long-term. I don't think that's going to work from a roster-building standpoint and a cap standpoint with a franchise quarterback making whatever Lamar is going to end up making, is assuming they get something done at some point. But in the meantime, you really do. How can you not really like what Roquan Smith has brought? And I think it's been very evident from a run defense standpoint. And certainly we saw him with his fingerprints on the pass defense with the big interception inside the red zone against Mitch Trubisky and the Steelers.
Luke, all great points about Roquan Smith. He's been a phenomenal addition to the Ravens defense. And going forward, a lot of questions that need to be answered for sure. The overall health of the team, Marcus Williams a week later, Ronnie Stanley. What's the injury update today for the Baltimore Ravens?
I mean, it's looking very favorable going into Saturday. I mean, Tyler Huntley was a full participant on Wednesday, and that's usually a sign that you've either cleared concussion protocol or you're on your way to clearing concussion protocol, because you can't even practice on a limited basis until you're at step 4 of the 5-step protocol. My understanding of it, and I know it's been tweaked, and certainly there was plenty of talk with what happened with Tua in Miami earlier this year, but my understanding of it, I see no reason to think that Tyler Huntley's not going to be good to go. Might be a few guys that are listed as questionable, but you kind of look at where they were for practice on Wednesday. Did a walkthrough on Tuesday, but on Wednesday, Lamar Jackson was the only player to miss practice entirely because of an injury. They had some guys getting some vet days. So, they've got, Zeitler's still limited a little bit with the knee, but I think he's going to go this week. A couple other guys have been a little limited in practice, but nothing that I would suspect is going to keep anyone out of the Browns game on Saturday. So that's where I said it's a big one. You don't want to just say this team's fully healthy when you're talking about your best player being out right now. But as it pertains to some of those names we've been talking about for weeks now, Ronnie Stanley, J.K. Dobbins, Marcus Williams, these are guys that appear to be healthy now. And they certainly looked healthy against Pittsburgh. So it really is just a matter of keeping guys on the field, and you keep your fingers crossed. We all know that you're an injury or two away from at the wrong position from being in serious trouble. I think, we've talked about corner, for example. I mean, they're giving Marcus Peters multiple vet days off during the week just to get him to Sunday and Sundays or Saturday in this case. Not that I think he's injured per se, but coming back from the knee, it takes a lot. So, it's really a case of trying to manage his reps and try to do everything you can to have him be at his absolute best current state as he can be come game days. So, so there's always some of that going on, and they do the same thing with Stanley with vet days for him and limited practices and whatnot. But as it relates to Saturday and who I expect to be out on the field, I really expect the full assortment of players other than Lamar Jackson. I think we're going to see Tyler Huntley, barring anything weird with concussions, which, hey, I think it's always important to acknowledge that. Don't make assumptions, but everything we've seen to this point in the week, as you and I are talking right now, suggests that Tyler Huntley should be out there against the Browns.
Yeah, and all the mock drafts that I've seen, Luke, always keep a small eye throughout the year on them. I've seen the Ravens taking a cornerback, given Marcus Peters his age, his health, and also Kyle Fuller being out. So all things at this point, of course, they can change between now and then, but all things are pointing to Ravens drafting a cornerback with their first-round draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, and people will say wide receiver, and look, I'm not going to say no to a wide receiver, but at this point in time, if we're talking about wide receiver, you've got to go get an established veteran.
Yeah, you can't roll the. I'm with you. You cannot roll the dice on a first round wide receiver. Get a guy that can make plays.
Sure. So, but I'm with you on that. I mean, it really is still so touch and go. That's why I'm not as. I don't want to say I'm down on the pass defense, but I still have questions about it because we saw Kyle Hamilton give up some plays in coverage. I mean, he's their nickel, and look, that's not even to say that I'm down on Kyle Hamilton, but he's a safety playing nickel, and that just speaks to the lack of depth that they have at corner behind Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey right now. So, my goodness, if something happens to one of those guys, and I'm not even saying like a major injury, but one of them rolls their ankle and they're going to miss a few weeks, then this thing changes. The outlook changes pretty dramatically there. So that's where you look at this thing and say, even if you work out something with Marcus Peters, that's a team-friendly, reasonable 2-year extension, something along those lines. I still think corner is one of their absolute biggest needs that they're going to be needing to address first or second round at the latest, I would say, for that, because that's certainly a position that you can talk all you want about stopping the run. Dennis, I'm still going to come back to the question here, and this is my big picture question, not talking about Cleveland on Saturday, but this team's greatest strengths right now are what? Running the football and stopping the run.
Yeah.
That was awesome 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Is that what's getting you to the promised land in 2022? I don't know. So that's where I still have the question about their pass defense. Not against the Browns, to be clear. Not against the Atlanta Falcons, to be very clear. Not against, not even against Pittsburgh, who was able to move the ball. But hey, at the end of the day, it was either Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett throwing the ball. So that's where, they were able to make those plays. But going up against those elite quarterbacks in the AFC, that's where I do look at the secondary, and I'm still a little nervous about their cornerback situation right now. Even though I'm not fazed by Marlon Humphrey having a down day in Pittsburgh. That's going to happen every once in a while. That was his one bad game of the year. I don't expect we're going to see that again. But that's where I do look at the Pat.
Yeah, Marlon also plays better
Go
when
ahead.
he's back in zone. He's in man coverage against tall receivers. So if you and I are game planning against the Ravens, we attack the corners. We go after Marlon or Peters, depending on whether the team is depending on their alignment, right? Jump balls to Marlon's side, and Marcus has been given receivers a lot of room to operate with, but we're certainly not going to run the ball. I know that you feel the same way I do here. On 3rd and short or 4th and short, I'm begging the other team to run the ball.
Sure. Yeah.
The chances are low they're going to get a first down. We saw Najee Harris do a square out against it was Patrick Queen for first down on 3rd and short, and I think we'll see more and more of that. The teams are going to shy away in short yardage situations and trying to get a first down via the run against the Baltimore Ravens, which should help them in their game planning.
Yeah, and that's where you hope that's going to help them in the passing game. As far as their pass defense. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, even Kansas City still wants to be able to mix in some runs, and when you do, you want to be effective. And that's where with the Ravens, I will point out, it's something I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. You see what they've done in terms of yards per carry allowed. They've done that large. They haven't been stacking the box. It's usually with 6 in the box where they're still able to completely shut down an opponent's running game. So again, I still am not ready to say that that's going to be the ticket to slowing down some of the best offenses in the AFC. But that's not to suggest that their pass defense is bad either. It's just their run defense is great or really great, and certainly that goes a long way in making a team more one-dimensional. And we'll see how that plays out. But certainly it's a dimension that should be very helpful to them as they try to go on the road and get a win on Saturday afternoon against the Browns team that I think is going to be fired up. It's a fan base. Hey, we've talked about this before. Those Cleveland fans, their Super Bowls trying to beat the Ravens, right? I mean, it really is for understandable reasons, whether we like them or not. You can understand it at the very least. So it really it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and I am very much intrigued to see how Deshaun Watson plays in Game 3 because so far he's been a net negative for them, and I'm not shocked by it because as I've said over and over, and I know you and I've at least mentioned it at a couple points, Jacoby Brissett wasn't their biggest problem. I mean, their defense has really been what's let them down. And I think what's been interesting is the last couple of weeks, their running game has gone in the wrong direction, which you would think would not be the case when you have an even more mobile quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And certainly for the Ravens, they want to put pressure on Watson, but can't let him escape the pocket, break the pocket, as we've seen some other mobile quarterbacks be able to do against them this season.
All right, look, last thing for me. This week we saw Kyler Murray go down with a knee injury, season-ending knee injury. This should be a cautionary tale for Lamar Jackson, right? There's only a few possible outcomes going forward. He signs, he says, trade me, or they franchise him, right? I mean, there's not many more options I can think of top of my head. So this thing has got to come to an end at some point, but I would think that Murray clutching his knee should be a cautionary tale for him. When he went down against the Broncos, I mean, I held my breath and I'm thinking, you know what, if he tears 3 ligaments here, he's done. He'll never be the same. So in the absence of him having an agent and whatnot, Luke, he's really gambling big time on his health.
Yeah, he is. Will he learn? Will he take that lesson from that? I don't know. I mean, I just don't know, Dennis. And look, Lamar can do what he wants. He's a grown man. I mean, he's 20. He's going to be 26 next month. He's been in the spotlight, not just in Baltimore, but I mean, this guy won the Heisman Trophy at Louisville. He's been in the spotlight and under the microscope for 8 years now, going on. So I don't really know what to say about it more than what you just said. I mean, I agree with you.
I mean, whatever the guarantee is on the table for him right now, if I were him, I'd be out to take it. And you can argue whatever, but to me, take the money. You're 25 years old. Have yourself a great 4 or 5 years. You get another contract, but at least protect yourself, because when he went down clutching that knee and it was so quick, and a lot of people watching at home never saw it. They didn't see it right away. We saw it. It was hard to see at the stadium. It was just he got sacked, right? So anything can happen during the course of a game.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. I mean, it was one of those deals where I saw him get up slowly, and I thought it was more so his helmet hitting the ground. But he walked to the sideline, wasn't any kind of dramatic limp or anything like that. And then suddenly I see he's in the blue tent. I mean, it was just like one of those deals where I was looking at my computer in the press box, and he was just, he's in the medical tent, and Tyler Huntley's on the field, and the Ravens are punting the ball, and then you're thinking, okay, what's going on here? I mean, it's tough because again, you don't want to tell someone else to do, how to handle their business. And I think a lot of people have tried to advise Lamar, but also realize, hey, he's going to do what he wants to do at the end of the day. And, but him, just like Kyler Murray or Tom Brady, 14 years ago when he tore his ACL, just playing from the pocket. I mean, no one is invincible as it pertains to playing in the NFL. And as much as Lamar, I will say this, he does, and we've said this all along, he has an uncanny ability to avoid big hits in the way that we've seen Tyler Huntley just in the last 2 games take some big shots that just you hold your breath. So even if he has that skill, that doesn't mean that he's 100% doing that all the time. And you just, you'd hate to see him miss out on, not that I'm losing sleep for him, and he's made $23 million this year, but that is a fraction of the kind of wealth that he's entitled to, that he deserves. Let's be clear about that. It's not as, some benevolent thing. He deserves it. He's earned that. He's that great of a player. But at some point in time, as we've said all along, you keep talking about trying to build your value and build your value and build your value. At some point, you still have to cash in your chips. You can be at the poker table with $1 million worth of chips there, but until you cash out, you still run the risk of losing that at some point in time. So, yeah, do I think the Kyler Murray injury is going to make an impact on him? I have no idea, Dennis. He keeps such a tight circle, and that's totally fine. I'm not saying that to sound like a whiny media member or anything like that. I respect that, but is he going to take that, or is that something that makes him dig his heels in even more about what he feels is important in terms of getting a fully guaranteed deal? And I certainly don't think it changes the Ravens' position on it. Let's be clear about that. I think that was already baked into the cake for them. So
you and I agreed upon that.
I really think
he may get that deal, but it will not be from the Baltimore Ravens. That's clear. They will not do that.
Yeah,
they're not. And they shouldn't. Honestly, they shouldn't. They really shouldn't.
Well, and let's face it, he hasn't had a terrible year. Let's be clear about that. Has he had a great year? I think his first 3 games of the season were fantastic.
100%.
Since then, the passing side is, going back to week 4, this has been a bottom 10 passing game. And I don't mean that just all on Lamar. Greg Roman, the lack of what they did at wide receiver, some of the injuries they had, with Ronnie Stanley being on and off the field, it's all baked into it. Let's be clear about that. But this certainly hasn't been a season that has, in my mind, elevated Lamar's value to the degree that the Ravens are going to budge from their offer, whether anyone else wants to agree with that or not. I mean, some people might say, well, maybe this shows how important Lamar is for this offense and that he is kind of a one-man show. And look, that might even be true, but I don't think I don't think anything that's happened this season is going to cause the Ravens to budge from where their offer was back in early September. So we'll see how it plays out. Again, there'll be plenty of time to talk about that. We still have these last 4 regular season games and what I do fully expect to be at least one playoff game, and we'll see what happens, as the Ravens likely get into the tournament, whether it's division or wild card, time will tell, but it's hard not to at least acknowledge it because it's that important to their future. I know some people, some fans have wanted media to just, hey, it's a non-issue. No, they're not talking right now. I get that, but it's still so important to the future of the franchise that how can you not at least be thinking about it, especially as Lamar's nursing a knee injury right now in the present, and you see one of his contemporaries, even if Lamar is better than him, and I do fully believe Lamar is better than Kyler Murray, but you see how health, can be such a fragile thing. You're healthy and durable until you're not anymore. Reality is Lamar Jackson's now dealing with a lower body injury for the 2nd December in a row that, this one doesn't appear to be as serious as the bone bruise in the ankle, but until we see him back and until we see him look right physically, there's going to be some question about it.
Number of factors here, Luke. Somebody wrote, I think about a year ago, that uh, the Ravens may use the Navy model, right? The midshipman model. You have this unique offense, and you interchange quarterbacks, and you have a great defense. And Tyler Huntley now is 2-0 this year with a great defense behind him. Last year the defense was a seed. We know football is a complementary game, but this is the wrong team to mess with. Ideally, you win a Super Bowl in your quarterback's rookie contract. We see the Eagles now with a good shot with Jalen Hurts, right? What's his third year now? That window's open. Do you put all that money in one position and hamstring your roster? Just so many different ways to think about this, right? And us as fans, we'd like to be competitive every year. Call me crazy, but this team is never rebuilt, right? The Ravens retool, reload, but they're never rebuilt.
Yeah, I hear you, but I will say, and this is where I'll take the opposite position. That all sounds great until you draft Kyle Bowler. You know what I mean?
100%,
Like,
100%.
I mean, that's and not just that, but we know how extraordinarily popular Lamar Jackson is in this
Right.
town and across the league, especially with young people.
Sure.
And if you're the Ravens wanting to sell season tickets and you're looking for 20 somethings and 30 somethings to buy those tickets, because we know that the older generations of Ravens fans that were the originals, they're not the ones showing up for 8 or 9 home games every season at this point, because they're up there in age, and it's just they're not going to do that. So I mean, there are football reasons for what you just said that are very valid, and there's merit to it, and ultimately takes two sides to get a deal done. And if you just get to a point where you just ultimately aren't going to get a deal done, then something's going to have to give, whether that's this offseason, next offseason, or the one after that. But at the same time, it's easy for me to sit back and say, well, okay, well, then you just move on, and you get your 3 first-round picks or whatever you're going to get from trading them to whatever team it ends up being in this hypothetical scenario. But boy, if you don't hit on the quarterback, and my goodness, it's not easy to do. The Ravens have been fortunate that they've hit on their last 2 quarterbacks that they've drafted in the first round in a big way. One being a Super Bowl winning, Super Bowl MVP, 10-year quarterback for you, and this Lamar being a unanimous MVP of the league. So the odds would tell you that the next one might not be, and is probably more likely to be less successful than either of those. So that's where it's fascinating. It really is. And I don't necessarily mean fascinating in a comfortable way for anyone that cares about the Baltimore Ravens, but boy, it's going to be an interesting offseason on a lot of levels, assuming, and this is another layer, assuming the Ravens don't, and Lamar doesn't have a Joe Flacco 2012 postseason run here. If he does, then maybe the Ravens are giving him a fully guaranteed deal. But if that doesn't happen, what happens with Greg Roman? What happens with Lamar? What happens with, let's face it, an offensive roster that desperately needs wide receiver talent? I mean, we can't continue to downplay that every year. Greg Roman said it the other day that Mark Andrews is seeing more double teams than he has the last few years. Well, sure. Yeah, because they don't have anyone else that teams respect. So something's going to have to give. At this point, again, short of that wild 2012 postseason run coming out of nowhere next month, I really think something's going to have to give. I don't feel that the status quo in its totality is going that's tenable. I think you're going to have to see something change, and probably would mean a Greg Roman, an offensive coordinator change, but could be much more dramatic than that, because again, Lamar Jackson's he's observing everything we are, so who knows?
Yeah,
I mean, where's his mind at this point in time?
Well, it's particularly when you see the team like the Eagles giving up a first and a third for A.J. Brown, which completely transformed that offense. Really did. Didn't hurt him for sure. Yeah. Definitely opened everything up for everybody else.
Yeah, but what's tough, and this is where I'll sound like a broken record, but this is where making that move should have been done 2 years ago. And now 100%. It becomes so much more difficult, because even the exclusive tag, you're talking about projected 43 million, I think the last I saw the projection would most likely be. So not saying that's impossible. There are always ways to manage the cap, but certainly much more reasonable to do something like that a couple years ago. But the Ravens didn't do it, and we'll see how this plays out. In the meantime, let's also remember, as much as you and I are getting ahead of ourselves here, 9-4 football team that's in first place right now. It's still
Oh, no
lots of
doubt.
fun to be had here over the last 4 weeks of the regular season, and then see where the chips fall after that.
Just hard to ignore last year's Super Bowl matchup. Odell Beckham Jr., Cooper Kupp on one side, and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd on the other side. And to me, if I'm the GM of a football team, when I have a QB1, it's nice to have a couple of wide receiver ones, if no other reason for injuries, right? And the other thing is, who are you going to double cover?
Yeah, no question about it. No question about it. And I actually looked at it, Dennis. I looked at the NFL's Final Four, so the conference championship participants going back to 2018. So it's just the last 4 years, but hey, that's the Lamar Jackson era right there. And I used DVOA, which is Football Outsiders, their efficiency metric, because I think it's not perfect, but it tells you more than just saying yards, right? It tells you more
Right.
than just saying yards per pass attempt. But I looked at it, and of those 4 participants each year, 16 teams, all but one of them ranked in the top 10 in passing efficiency. That one exception was Cincinnati last year, which they were second in passing efficiency over the last 8 games of 2021.
Yeah.
The Ravens, since the first 3 weeks of this season, where they were first in efficiency and Lamar had thrown 10 touchdowns, and we were all talking about it looking like 2019. Since then, they've been, I think last I saw 25th since week 4 in passing efficiency. It's where I love, don't get me wrong, I don't dislike running the football. I don't dislike playing great run defense. I just don't know if that translates to getting where you want to go come January and early February in the way that it worked for the Ravens 20 years ago. So, that doesn't mean you can't make the playoffs. Doesn't mean you can't win a playoff game, but I'm still, that's where I'm still not ready to, I'm not ready to make my plans for a deep January, early February run for the Ravens. But hey, you could have said the same thing about the Rams or the Bengals at this time a year ago. So you never know what's going to happen. Lamar Jackson could come back and be healthy and get on the heater throwing the ball like he was early in the season.
All great stuff as always, Luke. Please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, all the great stuff you do for Baltimore Positive, WNST, as well as your great blog that I always read and retweet for you.
Appreciate that, Dennis. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke. I'll be watching from home, not making the trip to Cleveland this weekend, but be tweeting and certainly looking for updates and monitoring what's happening at the Mistake by the Lake as the Ravens try to sweep the season series against the Browns, try to make the Browns 0-3, or 1-2. Could have been 0-3 in the Deshaun Watson era, as that first game was quite iffy for them. But check that out. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. The latest 12 Ravens thoughts, my predictions for Saturday this week. Keep in mind, game Saturday, 4:30 p.m. kickoff. And certainly we'll have injury updates and all my thoughts on the Ravens at BaltimorePositive.com. Want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. The final injury report of the week, game day inactives 90 minutes prior to kickoff, any significant notable injury updates, any notable roster moves, including if the Orioles ever make a move of note this offseason, any significant local sports news sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Ravens players and coaches interviews from Owings Mills. Check out all of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
Outstanding stuff, my friend. As always, looking forward to chatting up Storm with you again next week, hopefully after another Baltimore Ravens victory.
Yeah, absolutely. The way those Bengals are playing, the Ravens need to keep winning. I think that much is certain, and we'll see how it plays out, but feeling more and more like that Week 18 clash in Cincinnati. Could that be the Sunday night game? It's feeling like it could be, but Ravens need to take care of their own business, and then they can take a peek at the scoreboard.
Stay healthy and just win, baby. That's my motto.
There you go, Dennis. There you go. Be well.
You too. There he goes, Luke Jones here, 1570 AM WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.